You're listening to the Mid-Career GPS podcast, episode 87.
The way that I define it is it's a maladaptive approach to working that is kind of all-consuming. But there's these other components, so they feel obligated to work all the time, like this feeling of I should be doing this. I should be checking my email. They can't disengage from work when they're not working. They constantly are thinking about work. So even when they're doing other things, their thoughts continuously drift back to their work.
Before the pandemic, workaholism was something we talked about, but more than likely joked about with our colleagues, family, and friends. Maybe you or someone you know was always on their phone checking their email and feeling this urgent need to respond immediately. As mid-career professionals, there is no question about how much you care about your work, but is it too much? Are you afraid if you don't answer that text or email right away, you'll miss out on something or someone will think less of you and your work? In today's episode, you will meet Dr. Malissa Clark, an associate professor of Industrial-Organizational Psychology at the University of Georgia. She is the Work and Family Experience Research Lab Director at UGA, and her research broadly focuses on employee well-being, work and family dynamics, and workaholism. We're going to talk about why industrial organizational psychology is one of the fastest growing fields. We'll discuss what is workaholism and how it's impacting your work and home life, what organizations can do to improve employee well-being, and how the pandemic has increased workaholism and what's next. This is the Mid-Career GPS podcast, and I'm your host, John Nerrill. I'm here with you each week to help you find the job you love or love the job you have using my proven 4-step formula. It's time to start building your mid-career GPS, so let's get started. Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the podcast. Today's discussion on workaholism will resonate with many of you, especially if you feel as if your job is taking over your life and you're unsure how to set boundaries between your personal and professional life. Now, networking is a crucial topic to building your mid-career GPS, and it's one of the topics I cover in my new book, Your Mid-Career GPS, 4 Steps to Figuring Out What's Next, which is currently available on Amazon. I met today's guest through some cold networking. You see, a few months back, I read an article in Time magazine and saw this quote from Dr. Malissa Clark about the Great Resignation. She talked about employee burnout and workaholism. So I found her on LinkedIn. We exchanged a few messages, and I invited her to a phone call and then eventually onto this podcast, which she kindly and graciously accepted. So I want you to meet her.
My name is Malissa Clark, and I'm an associate professor of industrial and organizational psychology at the University of Georgia. So in my research, broadly speaking, I study employee well-being. I'm sure we'll get into that.
We will absolutely get into that today. But before we do, I always ask my guests what they wanted to be or do growing up. For Malissa, there wasn't a lot of clarity or this big epiphany about what she wanted to do as an adult.
Maybe I'm one of the only people that you've had that doesn't really have a good answer to this question. I never really had a clear idea of what I wanted to do. Is that strange?
No, not at all. Not at
I feel
all.
like I was clueless in what I wanted to do, honestly, until I was well into my 20s. I just really wasn't sure, but I knew I was always really motivated to be a good student. And so I always worked really hard to get good grades. I had a goal of where I wanted to go to college, but I didn't know what I wanted to do beyond that. But because I wanted to go to the University of Michigan, I knew that it would be really difficult to get in. So as a kid, my sole purpose was get good grades and be active in a lot of things.
Getting good grades and being active in many things has certainly served Melissa well. But even in college, there wasn't a lot of clarity about what she wanted to do.
Still a bunch of confusion. I did not know what I wanted to do until after college. And so choosing a major was really difficult. And the only way that I was able to decide on something was I chose a major that was designed to be all over the place. So there's a major called Organizational Studies that was created, I believe, while I was a student. So it was brand new. And at that point, it's much more structured now. But at that point, it was really how we wanted to make it. So we could choose three primary areas to focus on, and we needed to take upper level classes in those three areas. So I know I chose psychology and communications, and I can't remember precisely what the third one is, but it was something business related. So I knew I liked those classes. I didn't know what I was going to do with that sort of degree. Again, it just seems kind of like a generic degree. So choosing a major didn't give me any more clarity either. Unfortunately, I was really, you know, unsure of what I was going to do. But again, just motivated to graduate and get good grades. And I figured, well, eventually I've got to figure this out somehow.
There's a lot of pressure on graduating high school seniors to have it all figured out by the time they enter their freshman year. I went through it. You probably did too. We need to remember that sometimes in our lives, we don't always have the answers in the moment, but we get there. Like me, I bet you're wondering what Melissa did after college. This is where it gets interesting.
I didn't have a job right when I graduated. So I decided that since I didn't have a job, I had a lot of different part-time jobs starting in high school and all through college, and they were really involved with, the service industry, waiting tables and stuff like that, and sales. And so I had some pretty crazy sales jobs when I was growing up. In high school, I sold knives. And in college, I went for a summer across the country to California and sold books door to door for the whole summer.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I had this sales experience, and then I had food service experience, and this degree, which was not really very specific either. So I decided I'm just going to move somewhere where I want to live, at least for a little bit. So I moved from Michigan and chose San Diego. I knew I loved California from the summer I spent there in college, and San Diego is beautiful, with the weather. I do not like the cold, so I wanted to get as far away from the cold as possible. And I didn't have a job when I moved out there, and I found one after arriving. And lo and behold, you'll never guess what kind of job I got: sales.
Food service, sales, and customer service jobs are great experiences with versatile skills to not only have in your career, but are great ones to have on your resume. And how often in your career path have you gravitated toward what was comfortable? When we're trying to figure it out, it's not uncommon to go and do something we're familiar with for work because we know how to do it. But this sales job was a bit different for Melissa because it's here where she starts connecting the dots.
So my first job out of college was doing sales for a printing company, and I worked with marketing individuals to design brochures and help with the printing of those types of materials for the company. But it was a very intense sales job that I had.
So far, so good. Melissa has a job and she's working hard. After all, it's what we're supposed to do after college.
Basically, when I was in San Diego working this job, I decided that although I was really good at sales, it was wearing me down physically and mentally. And I had only been doing it a couple years, and I was already dreading going to work on Monday. I would get this pit in my stomach starting on Sunday, like, oh, I don't want to do all those cold calls. And it was a lot of pressure. Most of our salary was commission based. And so I decided I absolutely hate this. I hate it. I cannot do this for my whole career.
Now, Melissa's starting to have some clarity, even if that clarity is knowing what she doesn't want to do.
So I thought really hard. I went through my transcripts of all the classes I took in college, and I was like, I need to figure out what I like. And the thing that I kept on coming back to was this class in organizational psychology. And it was taught by a professor by the name of Fiona Lee, and she was so engaging. It was a 300-person lecture, but she captured the room. She would walk up and down, the stadium seating, and was so engaged and excited. And the research that she was talking about was just fascinating. She was talking about how to motivate employees and how to be a good leader and how to work with others in a team environment, things like job satisfaction, all these different concepts. I just thought it was super interesting. And I thought, well, this kind of class is something that I really enjoyed. So what can I do with a career focused on this? And that was when I started researching industrial organizational psychology and looking at PhD programs. And it wasn't something that I had considered up until that point. I guess I always thought I would just go into industry after undergrad. I hadn't really thought about getting an advanced degree, but I realized that if I wanted a career in industrial organizational psychology, you have to at least get a master's degree, if not a PhD. So I looked at PhD programs and applied to a ton of them, I think like 15 different schools. And I really didn't think I would get into anywhere because most people applying to these programs have had a lot of research experience in undergrad. They worked as a research assistant in a psychology lab and helped conduct studies and worked with professors. I did none of that because I didn't really know what I wanted to do, unfortunately. So I was really behind the 8 ball in terms of being prepared for the PhD program. I'm so lucky that the school I ended up getting into, Wayne State University, took a chance in me because it really was a gamble on their part, in my opinion, because I had no experience. My letters of recommendation from professors were probably not as good as other applicants because I didn't have a lot of close relationships with the faculty. A lot of my classes were very large lectures of 300 students, so they didn't get to know me very well. And actually, one of the faculty members in the program said that one of the reasons he liked my application was my crazy sales experience. So I guess it worked out that I had this really bizarre kind of background with my jobs. So that's how I ended up in a PhD program for industrial organizational psychology. I still thought when I started that I wanted to work in industry, work in the applied world for a company or for a consulting company. But my first year of graduate school, I realized how much I liked doing the research. And I shifted gears at that point and was finally found what I am doing now, which was to pursue a faculty career.
Here are a few takeaways. Melissa played the numbers game. Much like you need to do when applying for jobs, the more you apply, the greater your chances of finding that job you love. And never underestimate your experiences. There just may be something you've done that will get someone interested in learning more about who you are and what you do. As our conversation takes a turn, let's define what industrial organizational psychology is and the crux of Melissa's work.
The field of IO psychology is really all about taking psychological theories and principles and applying them to the workplace to one, help employers choose and select and promote the best people, but two, to focus on how to improve employees' satisfaction in their jobs, motivation, and trying to generally make the workplace a better place for organizations and employees. We're not therapists. I think that's something that's very commonly assumed, or they think we organize stuff in the workplace because of the organizational part of our title. But really, we don't do either of those things. Some IO psychologists might have the title of, they work in people analytics, high-level HR type of positions, or they, work on things such as managing the development of the employees, organizational surveys that might be assessed. Bottom line, we help organizations to function better and to treat their employees fairly. And we help employees by trying to make the workplace generally a place they want to spend their time and be. So my research specifically focuses on employee well-being, the work-family interface, all things that we all deal with, right? Work is such a huge part of our lives. And one thing I'm really passionate about is we want it to be a place where we don't dread. And I keep on going back to that sales job that I had, that I dreaded going to work. This is not something that's sustainable. And I know a lot of other people might feel that too. And so that's one of the things I try to focus on in my research, is highlighting what can be done.
Does your company have an IO psychologist? And if so, how familiar are you with their work? I asked Melissa where we most commonly find them.
IO psychologists definitely are in-house at the majority of the larger companies. So they might be employed directly by the company to work on, the selection, training, employee development, organizational surveys directly for that organization. And again, it's pretty rare nowadays for a very large organization to not have at least a couple IO psychologists in-house. There are, however, a lot of consulting companies that employ IO psychologists, and they, have specialties that if the company wanted to contract out, they would, reach out to a consulting company. So it's really split in terms of the kinds of applied jobs that IO psychologists could have. They could do external consulting, they could do internal, directly for the organization. There are a lot of IO psychologists that work for the government as well and do research for the government in the different institutions. So yeah, the thing I like about IO psychology is it's such a growing field. It's always, if you look on the lists of fastest growing occupations, IO psychology is always at the top 10, at the very top of these lists. So the number of jobs just continues to grow, and you can have a great career with a PhD and also with a master's in IO psychology. I actually teach in both of the programs at UGA. We have a PhD program and we have a terminal master's program, and I teach in both. And the types of jobs that these students are getting after college are so exciting. And especially now with the types of jobs that IO psychologists have do a lot of data analysis. And so any type of job that combines psychology and statistics, that's really where IO psychologists thrive because of the training that they get in the program.
Every company has a culture. You experience that culture every day. And if you've been at your organization for a while, you may have seen it change for the better or worse. Chances are, if you're listening to this podcast, you're a hard worker and care deeply about where your career is headed. But working hard and being a workaholic are two different things. I asked Melissa to define workaholism.
The way that I define it is it's a maladaptive approach to working that is kind of all-consuming. So the obvious thing is individuals that would be considered workaholics, they work all the time, right? That's a given. But there's these other components. So they feel obligated to work all the time, like this feeling of I should be doing this. I should be checking my email. They can't disengage from work when they're not working. They constantly are thinking about work. So even when they're doing other things, their thoughts continuously drift back to their work. And they feel anxious and guilty when they're not working. And all of these things combined kind of make up what I call workaholism.
Okay, be honest with yourself here. How much do you feel like you should answer that email right away? Dr. Clark's extensive research shines a lot on these behaviors that may or may not be apparent to you. And without question, we know that the last 2 years have been difficult. We've witnessed how much our work and our lives have changed because of the pandemic. And after almost 2 years of it, we've adapted pretty well in some ways, and in others, not so much. How have you handled responsibilities and roles with your family?
Yeah, I mean, it completely upended so many things about our work. Obviously, at the very beginning, when everything was shut down and we had the shelter in place orders, a lot of schools and daycares were closed. That was a particularly crazy time in all of our lives. And a lot of families, those with young children, they were really put in this place where they had to figure out a way to manage work and family. And I have some research that we conducted right at that time of dual income couples with young children. And we asked them, how did you manage everything? And we can get into this if you want, but we found some very interesting findings where about half of the couples came up with really egalitarian or equal kind of divisions of who took care of the children. And they were really creative with finding ways to switch the responsibilities based on who had what going on that day. But the other half of couples, it was falling back into these traditional, stereotypical gender roles where even though both of them were working full time, and these are traditional heterosexual couples, even though they were both working full time, for half of the couples, the women took on all or almost all of the childcare and tasks for that around the house.
And there are other ways our work and responsibilities have shifted, especially when it comes to remote work and what a new job might look like as you build your mid-career GPS.
In terms of other ways that it's changed the way we work, the shift to remote work is definitely something that some organizations had started doing this, but there was a ton of pushback, like this will never work on a full-time basis. But then the pandemic forced the issue and organizations had to try this. And what they found was that it actually works. People were not less productive when they're working from home. That doesn't mean that they weren't working harder and more burnt out, but it didn't seem to affect, a lot of people's performance. And so this is why we see a lot of employees now thinking, actually, I kind of like working from home. Maybe this is an arrangement that I want to try to pursue moving forward. And so we see people switching careers and really thinking about what arrangement works better.
As you spend time in the preparation phase, the first phase of building your mid-career GPS, it's time to evaluate what you want and don't for your career and your life. Whether you realize it or not, it's where you spend the majority of your time building your mid-career GPS.
For a lot of workers, what we are hearing in the surveys and the interviews that we're doing is that a lot of people are rethinking what's important to them. Is it really something that they want to be working this number of hours. Maybe they want to get rid of their commute so they have more family time. They're seeing loved ones being affected by COVID and realizing life is short. Our interviews with workaholics, and we've only done a small number of them so far, but the pattern of what they're saying is very different. It's, yeah, it hasn't really affected me much. I'm still doing what I was doing, and I'm going to continue to do what I was doing. So this idea of kind of this epiphany of maybe I want to make a change is not universal across everyone. So we're definitely seeing some differences.
How does your organization support you and your fellow employees? Let's acknowledge that some organizations are doing it very well, some are not, but everyone is trying their best. And it's why, especially during the last 6 months, employees are seeking a stronger alignment between who they are and where they work.
Thought their organization was supporting their employees, but really kind of maybe their true colors shined through a little bit during the pandemic, and they weren't supporting employees as much as, you know, someone thinks they should. And so that's another aspect that people are reevaluating. You know, do I want to work for this employer? Do they have my back? And some employers have been fantastic during the pandemic, right? And this has really been fantastic. But what's disappointing is some organizations, you know, I think they could have done some things a lot differently. And so that might be part of this great resignation too. People are realizing this is not the place I want to be. Maybe I like what I'm doing, but I'm going to find somewhere else that it's a better fit for, you know, what I am looking for out of a company and my values. So we are seeing some shifting with that too.
What can organizations do to improve company culture and overall employee well-being?
It's just so important to listen to your employees and to hear them. I think it's not very helpful when the organization is, you know, offering policies and procedures that, you know, we offer this flexibility, we offer this type of service, but are they actually talking with employees and asking them, what would be helpful for you? And instead of these blanket, you know, across the board types of resources. So organizational surveys, I think, are critical here. And some companies are really great at this. But the problem is if the organization is, you know, administering a survey and employees are taking the time to tell the organization what they need and what would be helpful for them, but then nothing is done with the data that comes out of that. It can be even more detrimental than if the survey was not even done in the first place, because that basically signals that they're not paying attention to their employees. And I think it's very important moving forward out of the pandemic that organizations learn from what they did well and what they did not do well during the pandemic, and trying to figure out with the employees what can be improved. What are they, you know, where are the areas that they can do more to support all of their employees, not just some of their employees, but all of their employees.
All right. I hear the collective groan about surveys. Stay with me. It's about what your company will do with them once they have collected all of the survey information. And admittedly, the response rate may not be that high. One of the ways an IO psychologist can help your company is to process the data from any survey with meaning and intentionality as they find better ways, as Malissa stated, to support all of their employees. One way to build trust with your employees is to listen to that information and figure out what you're going to do with it. And that action cannot be dismissing it. Melissa and I also talked about some of the pain points that middle level managers face. And one of them was about finding ways to manage remotely when their team wasn't.
Leaders and managers were not trained to manage remote workers. And all of these changes to how many of us did our jobs, this is all uncharted territory. And so that puts a lot on the shoulders of the managers to kind of be adaptable and learn how to be a different leader than maybe what they had done up until that point. So, that's another area that I think can really help to, ultimately the employees, but also, the leaders and managers as well.
I asked Melissa what she sees as the biggest challenge facing employees and organizations today. Her answer may not surprise you, but it should confirm and acknowledge what you are going through.
What a lot of the workforce is dealing right now is like this cumulative burnout and just exhaustion with everything that's happened over the last couple of years. And I think it's important that we keep in mind that as we have all gone through this trauma, and we've had so many unique challenges on top of what our normal workday would be, our normal lives. And so it's okay if you're still struggling. And it's okay if you're feeling these feelings of job burnout. I felt it too. I mean, for the first time in my professional life, I actually felt what it meant to be burned out. It was hard teaching Zoom classes every day and seeing, the students with they don't turn their cameras on, and it's just a very different type of way of doing your job. It's really tough. And for a lot of us, all of these changes are really, really hard to manage. And so it takes time to get back to feeling like yourself again. And so I would say just one thing I want to communicate is that it's all right if you're still not feeling on top of your game. I would say it could be a variety of things. One thing to focus on could be, do you like where you are? Is this the kind of place that you want to continue your career? But if your answer to that is yes, I'm just not feeling right now. I'm just not as good of a worker as I should be. Again, I'd try to just give yourself some grace, and try to do things to improve your well-being, things that help you to rest and recover. The rest and recovery literature is fascinating, and the more strategies you can use that work for you to help you to disengage from work when you're not working, this type of psychological detachment is very rejuvenating. So if you can properly kind of leave work when you're done working for the day, focus on being present in the moment with your family, in activities that you're doing, pursue hobbies outside of work and develop that area of your life, that actually will be better for your work performance over time. And it's difficult to do a lot of these things now with the pandemic, but baby steps, right? It's going to take some time.
I asked Melissa what advice she has for you to help you build your mid-career GPS.
Well, I love that question. I'd say the advice I would give is to be open to new possibilities that come up. Don't be afraid to say yes to different opportunities that maybe don't seem super appealing, or you're not really seeing a clear path why I should do this, because it might open doors that you don't even realize are there. And when I think back in my career, the different things that shaped where I am in my career, I could have never predicted. But what I do know is if I would have said no to some of those opportunities and challenges, it wouldn't have opened certain doors. And even right now in my career, things that maybe temporarily might be scary, like being on podcasts or doing talks for groups of individuals, it helps create new connections that then lead to other opportunities. And I found some great opportunities just because, I decided I'm going to do this talk well, this is before the pandemic, in, St. Louis, for example. I meet someone there and that ends up building a new connection that gives me a new opportunity to help develop new skills that I didn't previously have. And so this, it's not predictable. And so just be willing to kind of say yes to some things that might be a little scary, a little intimidating. You're not sure if you're going to knock it out of the park because you might be surprised, even if, you didn't knock it out of the park. Maybe you built a connection, and that personal connection with someone might open another career opportunity moving forward.
Here's how you can connect with Dr. Malissa Clark, and be sure to check the show notes for those links. And come back as I wrap up this episode.
Look up my research lab on the web. It's waferlab.org. Stands for Work and Family Experience Research, by the way. Or they can follow me on Twitter at Clark Malissa. My name is spelled with an A, Malissa, so it's a little unusual. Or they could, look me up on the University of Georgia's website and email me through there. I would love to connect with people. I'm always looking to hear different stories because I love learning, right? And I love hearing about people's experiences, and anything I could do to help. I'm definitely more than happy to make those connections.
I will make sure that all of those are in the show notes for everybody. Dr. Malissa Clark, thank you so much for spending some time with me today on the Mid-Career GPS podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Whether you're in a formal leadership role or not, you are responsible for your company's culture. It's those things you say in a Zoom chat, a phone call, over an email, or instant message. Listen to what you say about your company. It will give you some insight into what you want to do next. No place is perfect. I have worked everywhere from a Catholic church to the state superintendent's office and many places in between. None of those places were perfect businesses to work for. However, some were better fits for me than others. Some served me for a while, and when I outgrew the position or what I wanted to do changed, I knew it was time for me to move on. Malissa Clark peeled back the curtain for us today about what an industrial organizational psychologist does and how they can help organizations support employee well-being and improve the overall organizational culture. Please make sure to connect with her on LinkedIn and let her know how much you enjoyed listening to her on this podcast. Now, if you're looking for some help navigating your career transition, I want you to go and get a copy of my book, Your Mid-Career GPS, 4 Steps to Figuring Out What's Next. It's available on Amazon or your favorite retailer. And remember, you build your mid-career GPS 1 mile or 1 step at a time, and how you show up matters. Make it a great rest of your day.